Can you actually grow muscle working out from home? Yes, you definitely can, but only if your equipment setup is adequate and the program is intentionally structured to create a muscle stimulus. In this episode, I'm breaking down exactly what you need to make progress, what's not ideal, and how to work around it if you don't have full gym access. Let's get into it. So this is a question that I'm getting asked a lot lately within Create Your Shape because I have probably 40% or more of my ladies working out from home. So I definitely see ladies build muscle all the time and create awesome shapes from working out from home. However, you have to have certain things in place in order to create muscle growth. So it doesn't just happen. And this is likely the same if you're at a gym too, but especially if you're at home, you want to consider a handful of things. And with this episode, I have a special announcement. This has been in the works for a while. So within Create Your Shape, we really focus on optimizing nutrition for ladies who are lifting weights, as most everyone is already on a program, a training program. However, I realize that people that are wanting specific programs to build a specific shape and really need it to check off all these boxes. And it was becoming harder and harder to find programs to suggest them to. So I've worked with a handful of ladies with their training in the past year and creating custom training programs and really seeing what equipment they typically have access to, what their goals are, what their experience is to really put together a program, a training program that considers the Create Your Shape person. So if you're listening to this podcast episode, that would be you as well. So now within Create Your Shape, you'll also have access to the Create Your Shape training program. So this is a progressive overload training program. It's full body, but an emphasis on glutes and shoulders, and then a secondary emphasis on back and legs, and optional emphasis if you have. I share how to add different things on if you're like, oh my gosh, I've been really wanting to work on my triceps and things like that. It is adjustable, so you can do it at home, like we're going to talk about today, or in a full Globo gym, and you can switch it up to either be 3, 4, or 5 days per week. So that is now available within Create Your Shape, which I'm so excited for this round's Create Your Shape ladies to enjoy. And then all of the Create Your Shape rounds going forward will also have access to it. So with that, let's talk about specifically, can you grow muscle at home? Can you actually grow adequate muscle at home and create a shape to look like you lift weights? And the answer is yes, but there are certain things that need to be in place, and there are definitely some limitations, but you can generally offset those limitations up into a certain point. So first, let's just start with getting on the same page of how is muscle actually built. So muscle is built by creating a muscle stimulus. There needs to be a stimulus in the shoulder muscles that then send a signal to say, okay, she's doing something that is making us need to grow back bigger and stronger. So creating a muscle stimulus, how would you do that? Well, being on a progressive overload training program, meaning every week you are hitting that same muscle group with the same exercise in the same or similar rep scheme. So that way, every week you are progressing. And when you progress, that is what sends the signal or the stimulus to that muscle to grow back bigger and stronger. So what's going to be ideal? Typically around, let's just call it, let's make it a little wider. Let's call it 6 to 15 reps. And that's 2 to 3 sets. So that is going to be like your typical most optimal progressive overload training program style. So that is how you make progressions at home. So let's just kind of start there. That is what's required to build muscle. It's to create a muscle stimulus. So you can do that pretty much anywhere as long as you have things that allow you to progress. So you can definitely do that at home, but I'm going to talk about what typically I see that is the limiting factors and then how to adjust them at home. So first and foremost, of course, it is heavy enough weights. So in order to create that muscle stimulus, you have to progress. So let's say you're doing shoulder presses. and then you're within the confines of what we just talked about, of what's really optimal for muscle growth, you're doing shoulder presses, and let's say you only have 20 pounds. And then let's say you're doing 15 reps of those and you're doing 3 sets of 15. And you can do that easily, or you can do that and it's a little bit hard, but you're not really going to failure and you have nowhere to go up from. Then that's going to limit you, right? So then you would need heavier weights, right, in order to keep progressing. I typically see this more so with lower body, because typically always our lower body is going to be so much stronger than our upper body. So we need really like double the amount of weights, right? Like if someone's doing, or if we can go up to, let's say, like 45 pounds or 50 pounds on our presses, like per hand, right? We're going to be able, and that's, what is that, like 90 pounds total, which is really heavy, right? That person for their lower body needs to be doing probably near double that, so 150 or 180 pounds on their lower body to make progress, right? Because they're just so much stronger than the bottom. Now that's on the stronger end. I would say on the lighter end, if you see somebody doing like 15 pounds on shoulder presses, then their lower half, they probably need to be doing like 70 pounds, right, in order to see those progressions, because that's how strong you're going to be. So why that doesn't work is you just don't have enough weight to create a progression within the confines of those like sets and reps. So my suggestion is to get weights up to probably in the 10 to 75 pound range. Now you could probably start with, in the 10 to 40 pound range or 35 pound range, and then keep going up as you need it. That's what I see a lot of my ladies do. They're like, oh my gosh, I'm getting stronger, I'm going to order a new set of dumbbells. Oh, I'm getting stronger, I'm going to order 5 pounds up, and keep going up that way. Now I'm going to talk about what to do in the meantime, and that would really come down to unilateral and tempo work. So for example, let's say that you are like, well, but generally the limiting factor is always going to be in the legs, because you need heavier weights for that. And so let's say you're like, all right, I can do, I put the dumbbells on my shoulders, and I've got, a 50 pound on this side, a 50 pound on this side, and I can do a set of, 15 squats with that. And I just don't have heavier weights to go heavier to create the stimulus in my legs. So what I would suggest doing instead is to do unilateral. So when you do unilateral, which means just one leg and one side, you can do like a Bulgarian split squat, which essentially is a single leg squat where you prop your foot up behind you. And then if you just do one leg, then generally you're going to need half the amount of weight. So then you can drop down to, let's say, 25 pounds on each shoulder, and then from there let's say you get 15 reps, and then next week you're like, all right, well, I need to go up, and I have now the weights to go up. I can add 30s next week, and so it just really increases the range of how much equipment you can use. The other thing would be tempo work. So for example, if you, going back to doing that squat, let's say if you go down in a squat, and if you go down 1 second and then come up and it takes you 1 second, versus if you go down the squat for 3 seconds, hold at the bottom for 1, and then come back up for 3 seconds, that is going to be a lot more challenging. You're going to have to decrease the weight in order to get the reps that you need. So that is another way to decrease and or increase the amount of equipment that you can have access to, and still create a stimulus and still progress with your muscle groups, especially the lower body. So the other thing that I see, so that's the biggest thing, is heavy enough weights. The next thing I see is access to equipment. So definitely you need weights. If you don't have weights, right, then how are you going to create that muscle stimulus? There are definitely some things you can do. Actually, in Create Your Shape, I have a travel training program where if you're just in your hotel room and you're like, all right, I've got to create, a stimulus to these muscles. There are definitely things you can do, but it is very limited and it's going to be very tricky to set up your progressions. So for example, if you put your feet on the bed and do like almost like a handstand, right? That's a good alternative for a shoulder press. But then how do you progress from there? And then that's really the only exercise you can do. So I would say you could get some progress there, but I would say no. If you don't have any equipment at all, it's going to be hard to really build adequate muscle at home. It's a great maybe starting point, but you guys listening to this here, you're not at a starting point. So limited equipment, right? So what is like the basic equipment that you would need? I would say the dumbbells that I just suggested, and then a bench for sure. A bench to maneuver your body in different positions to do kind of a range of exercises that would get every muscle. So I would say that is like the minimum that you would need that you could still build like adequate muscle for sure. So a range of dumbbells and a bench. What would I add on after that? Or would I say like, what is the limitation after that? It really is back and legs. You can really only do so much with that setup. You kind of have a lot of options for different muscle groups, but you're kind of limited there. And so what would be the next thing that would just give you so many different options? And that would be barbell and a barbell rack. And so the barbell, you can really add on tons of weights, and you can get like smaller plates too. That gives you a range of weights. But then the barbell rack, because if you have it on heavy enough, which you would, then you need something to hold it up for you. So this just gives you a handful of different options and different ways to create resistance in different positions for different muscle groups. So that's another one. And then the next one I would say is some type of cable machine. So with a cable machine, it really opens you up to different back exercises that you can do. It gives you lots more option and lots more resistance profile, like lateral raises and kickbacks and like the adductors, and triceps and biceps. So it really gives you just a ton more options in a greater like kind of resistance profile of your range of motion. So those are the main things. Like I have a friend she has a garage gym in Chicago, and I'm thinking like that's exactly the setup she has, and it's great, right? She has so much room for progress. So that's amazing. I don't think you have to have it, but that would be the next step in terms of the equipment. Now, what would I do after that? Definitely something with a leg extension and a leg curl. Those two are going to be the hardest to replicate without, with just the, cable and barbell and dumbbells. So a leg extension for the quads and then a leg curl for the hamstrings. Like those are definitely optimal machines that generally you're not going to find in a garage gym, but if you did have space and wanted to add machines there, that would be like the next thing. So that's in terms of getting heavy enough equipment, and then also the type of equipment. Now I kind of went through like what is required, but then also what would be the progressions on how to go from there, and ideas to kind of when you start to think about like what equipment you would want to fill in your home gym. Some things I will say that I see, and I'm like, I would not kind of waste time or money on that, is things like kettlebells, right? Unless you want to be doing like CrossFit style cardio, or you just enjoy it for cardio, I don't think it really makes sense for, or it's not the most optimal piece for building in terms of building muscle. Now, does it mean like don't get it? Is it bad? No, of course not. More options always give you more options, but that's definitely something that I see. All right, moving on. The third thing that I would consider after heavy enough weights and equipment access is enough weights. So what I mean, and the problem that I see people run into, is they have like a 15 pound, and then the next one they have is a 25 pound. So they're doing their shoulder presses and they're like, all right, well I can do, I get through my set with 15 pounds, but then I want to go up, but I can't go up to 25 pounds because then I don't get enough reps. So I kind of feel stuck. And so that can feel really frustrating, especially if it's every single exercise and you feel like you're limiting your gains, because you are. Now, what I suggest doing is getting micro plates. And so micro plates are little plates that you can add on, that you can kind of clip onto the dumbbell. They have 1 pound, they have 2.5 pounds, right? And it kind of gives you more weight to increase with at a smaller amount to keep increasing steadily. Another thing you can do is get an adjustable dumbbell. So I know I've used before where it's one set of dumbbells, but you just turn the knob and it can be from 5 pounds to like 35 pounds. So that's another option, because then it just gives you like kind of, 2.5 increments that you can continue to increase by. So that's what I would suggest. In the meantime, what I would suggest doing is just going up in reps. So let's say the program calls for, okay, I've got to do like 3 sets of 10 or 10 to 12. Then let's say, all right, I can do a set of, let's say lateral raises. I can do, for 10 pounds, I can do 12, right? But I can't do the next weight that I have. I'm going to stay at this weight, and let's say, all right, I'm going to go up until like I can't go anymore. And maybe that's 15, maybe that's 16. And I'm just going to keep going up until I feel strong enough to get to my next weight that I can at least do, I would say 6, maybe even 8 for. Once I can go up to that next weight and then do that amount, then I would just switch to that next weight. Until then, I would just keep increasing my reps while I'm waiting for that microplate or the new adjustable dumbbells. All right, so that's the third thing. Now, the fourth thing that I think is like underrated, but it definitely is a part of working out from home, it is vibes. It is just straight up vibes. So in your home workout setup, I see people get easily distracted. And so they're like folding laundry in between their sets, or their dog comes in, or their like kids come in, and they're also cooking dinner. So then they like run back and forth. And it really is just not optimal, because then you are not focused on what you're doing next. So you're not thinking about, okay, is my form good? Am I squeezing the muscle? Am I like focused on the actual like contraction that I'm trying to create? Are I tracking weights and making sure I'm improving from next time? I'm not getting consistent rest. So then let's say if you rest 1 minute before, or 1.5 minutes before your next set, right? That's going to be wildly different than if you rest 4 minutes in between your set. And so let's say every week you're doing something different, then you're going to have drastically different weights that you're choosing and reps that you can do. And it's just not a good setup to progress. So that is definitely a big one. So the other thing with vibes is just the environmental like factors that you would have at a gym. So when you go to the gym, the music's on, that's the only thing you can do. So you got to get in, you've got to focus. There's other people around you who are lifting weights and getting after it. And you aren't going to like just bitch out, because there's other people around you who know that you are working out, and whether they really care or not, you're thinking about it. So that is another factor. So what I suggest doing is setting up a space where it's a dedicated area, right? Everything has a certain spot. So when you go in there, you know exactly where it is. You're not collecting things. Everything isn't all over the place. There is lighting in there, meaning it's either a vibe, a mood, or you can see it's lit and you can actually see what's going on. It's temperature friendly. So if it's super hot or super cool, like you're generally not going to want to be in there. You want a place that you want to be in. Music. Set up your music. So it's like, okay, this is go time. And then timed workouts. When you're going to work out, you are working out. You're not doing anything else, because then what happens is you're not getting a great workout. It is probably 30% less beneficial of a workout if you're also doing something else. And then that other thing that you're also doing is also not as well. So separate them out, get in, focus on the job that you want and creating that muscle stimulus. Now, I understand that for many of you guys, the reason why you do work out at home is to save time and save energy from like having to drive to a gym, or to be able to kind of get things done at the same time, or because you have kids who like need to be watched during that time frame. And so knowing that all of this is a factor, I have tons of women who have kids who are watching their kids while also training, but they set it up so well where they say like, okay, this is mommy's time to work out, but they also assign their kids different tasks to be able to do during that time. So the kids aren't coming in and distracting them, but instead they have their kids set up to do different activities, whether that's also like working out with them in a mini version, or they're doing their coloring activity. Like I've seen it time and time again, which is so cool. So it is definitely doable. And I get that some of these are the reasons why you are staying at home to work out, but you just want to consider it to, am I still getting the most out of it? Or how can I set this up better to get the most out of it? So with that, the final thing that I want to talk about is going to a gym more optimal? And the answer is yes. Now, why is that the case? And is it always the case? I would say no, it's not always the case, but in certain situations, why is it the case? It is just because you're going to have more access to more equipment that is going to be more optimal for creating that stimulus of that muscle group. Now, can you offset that, a majority of that at home? I would say to a good majority, yeah, with everything we just talked about, for sure. However, there may get to a point where it is just not as optimal because you are so advanced. So for example, I am working with somebody who they have a garage gym like set up in their house where she has a leg press in her house. She has a leg extension in her house. Like how cool is that? However, she is strong and she is progressing on it. Could she still progress while she's at home? Yes. However, she went to the gym the other day and she was like, wow, it's kind of nice just being in an environment that's like people are getting after it. Like I feed off of that energy. So that's one thing. The second thing is she's like, wow, I use their leg machine and I get such a better range of motion because of the specific machine that they have. So is that more optimal? In this situation, yes. However, there are many pieces of equipment at gyms that wouldn't be more optimal just because of the specific machine, or maybe for me, a lot of times the machines are just too big for me. So I'm like, okay, this is pointless. I'm just going to go over and use the dumbbells in the bench section anyway. So personally, for me, do I plan on, especially when we have kids and all that, having a garage set up? Yeah, for sure. And will I be able to still make progress there? Yes, for sure. So I definitely don't think anyone should feel limited in their garage or at home gym. You just want to make sure that you've got everything that I've talked about considered, and always go back to like, well, how do I create muscle? I've got to create the stimulus in that muscle group. All right, so that is today's topic, and I will see you next week on the Create Your Shape podcast.